For 55 years, I thought I could see clearly. Then I found none of us can, until we find the lens nobody gave us. In the earliest years of my life, before I had language for any of it, before I even knew it was happening, a lens was forming, not chosen or designed, built from everything around me. The way love moved through my household, my mother, my father, aunts, uncles, grandparents, a lot of life in those walls. Safety expressed or withheld, the adults around me carrying or unable to carry the weight of their own unexamined stories, all of it absorbed in the nervous system of a child who had no way of knowing there was anything to question because it was simply the air she was breathing. And that lens shaped the way I saw myself, the way I saw myself shaped the way I read every room, relationship, every moment of pressure and possibility that followed. My lens was shaped in a household full of life stories and unspoken roles. Yours was shaped somewhere too, which means this is where everything shifts and is what I need you to sit with today. This lens does three things that are foundation to how you show up every day. Once seen, it begins to explain the gap you couldn't close, no matter how much you achieved, changed, or built. Consider this. Gallup 2024 global research found that 79% of people are disengaged from their work, going through the motions, present but not fully there. But here's what the research cannot fully see. Behind that disengagement is something deeper, a self that has been running on a lens it never consciously chose. Because this is something you will hear throughout Finding Yes. Everywhere you go, there you are. The lens travels with you into every room and relationship until you can finally see it. First, the lens shapes your perspective, the way you see the world. That's why two people can stand inside the same divided, uncertain, difficult moment in history and live completely different lives inside it. One through a lens of scarcity, division, and threat, where vigilance becomes the only safety you know, where belonging is always one step from conditional. The other through a lens of trust and belonging, where the same uncertainty feels like you can navigate it, where the same rule feels like possibilities. Not because their circumstances are different, because their lens is. That lens doesn't stay in one room. It comes with you, the way you read every room before anyone has spoken, already calculating whether you belong or whether belonging will cost you something. The second, your perspective filtered your perception. The stories running quietly beneath everything you've built, the ones that say your needs are too much because belonging always had a price. And yeah, the working twice as hard is just the price of being seen because the threat never fully left. The whisper that the feeling you're looking for is always one more achievement away because scarcity taught you that arrival was always just out of reach. And third, your perception has been holding your unrealized potential in place ever since. The leadership you were built for, the relationships that don't require performance, the version of you that never had to earn her place. You've been a prisoner of a perspective you could not see because you were inside it. That changes today. Leadership starts within. It starts with you, always. My name is Lolita Devi Singh. Welcome back to Finding Yes, Your Empowered Success. We are still inside Chapter 2, learning the story of me. Today I'm giving you the lens, the full one, end to end, my lifespan lens. Not a clinical framework, not a prescription, lived experience, drawn from my own story, from the stories of every person I've walked alongside, and from the learning, unlearning, and relearning that changed everything about how I understand myself and the people around me. It's anchored in science and evidence-based research, confirmed by what living has already shown. Recognizing these are highly complex developmental stages. What we're doing here is making them visible, simply enough so that you can find yourself in them. Life always comes first. Science follows. Because you can't change what you can't see. And the thing that most needs seeing is the foundation everything else rests on. The years before you had words for what you were absorbing. We go deep there today, because the science beneath it is something every human being should have been taught long before adulthood. We'll close with one practice, one that lets you begin using the lens in your actual life. And here's what I know through my lived experience and every person I've walked alongside. When your perspective shifts and your perception recalibrates, your unrealized potential is released and your empowered self is revealed. This is the literacy nobody gave us until now. The easiest way to find your lens is to watch somebody else find theirs. So before I give you the framework, let me show you what the lens actually looks like when it's running. Not in theory, in a life, in the specific, ordinary, quietly costly moments of a real life. Mine. And I suspect yours too. There is a moment that many of us know and almost none of us talk about. You've just done something significant, finished something that took real effort, time, real pieces of yourself to complete. And for one brief moment, the room is quiet and the work is done, and there's nowhere you have to be and nothing left to prove in this particular moment. And instead of exhaling, you reach for that next thing, not because the next thing is urgent or because someone is waiting, but because stillness, for reasons you have never fully examined, doesn't feel like rest. It feels like something is wrong. You are falling behind. And the voice that moves you towards the next thing, the one that makes rest feel like a risk, that voice did not begin in this season of your life. It didn't begin in your career or your ambitions or even in the years you spent building everything you've built. That voice was formed long before any of that, in a room much smaller than this one. Here's what I know about my own formation in those years. My parents wanted for me what their parents had wanted for them, and what had been hard-won across generations before any of us. Safety, stability, a life that could not be taken away. And the path to all of that had a name in our household. It was called achievement, education, producing something the world would have to respect, even when the world was not otherwise inclined to. I understood that message, not because anyone sat me down and delivered it clearly, but because I was a child, and children don't need explicit instructions to learn what is valued in the environment they depend on for survival. They feel it, watch it, they absorb it in a way the body absorbs warmth or cold, completely, without effort, without awareness that the absorbing is happening at all. What I absorbed was this. The version of me that was performing was a version that was safe. Not because my parents were harsh, love was not withheld, not at all, but because the anxiety of people who have had to fight for belonging lives in the air of a home, and a child breathes it in, and the nervous system draws its built conclusions quietly and thoroughly and without a single word being spoken. So I became very good at performing, at producing, at making myself matter to whatever room I was in through what I could deliver, demonstrate, and achieve. And I called that drive, I called it ambition, I called it, well, who I am. And in many ways it served me, built a life. It opened doors that were not always open to people who looked like me. It carried me through the rooms that had not necessarily expected me to arrive. But there was a cost running beneath all of it that I couldn't see, because I was too deep inside it to have any distance from it. I didn't know how to receive without immediately producing something in return. I couldn't rest without the low hum of guilt that followed me everywhere. Most of all, I didn't know how to need something from another person without the quiet, persistent sense that needing was an imposition, that my needs had a cost, and the people I loved had already paid enough. None of that was true, but truth is not what the absorbed pattern runs on. It runs on what was learned, and what was learned at 6 and 11 and 9 years old was that love and safety arrive through performance and self-sufficiency, and what required them to work harder on my behalf was a weight I did not want to become. You You may not share my particular story, but I would ask you to sit with your own version of your story and this question. What did you learn in those earliest years about what it cost the people around you for you to have needs? What did you absorb, not from what was said, but from what was felt, about whether it was fully safe to be exactly who you were? Stop this video for a moment if you need some time to reflect on that question. Because the answer to those questions is not in the past. It's running in your life right now. In the meeting where you would over-deliver when collaboration would serve better. In the relationship where you say, I'm fine, long after fine has left the building. Or the moment you make yourself smaller in a room where you were built to take up the space. The child who absorbed those lessons was doing exactly what children are designed to do. She was reading her environment and adapting to it because adaptation was how she stayed loved, and staying loved was how she stayed safe. She was bright, some said brilliant, and the pattern she built suited the world she was in. The question that Finding Yes exists to answer is simply this: does the pattern still serve you in the way you want to live and feel every day? Let that sit. So now you've seen what the lens looks like from the outside, in a life, in a pattern, in the quiet cost of a strategy built before you had any say in it. Now let me show you the architecture behind it. Here's my lifespan lens, not as a list to memorize, as a story, the shape of a human life mapped from the beginning. Because when you can see the full arc, something shifts. You stop reading your life as a series of isolated events, and you start reading it as a system, one that has been formed and can be understood, one that once seen can finally begin to enable the choice of change. Here's what it looks like. First, before you were born lies what I call the inherited imprint, receiving before choosing, the biology we walked through together in our last episode, what was already present in the nervous system before you drew your first breath. Then comes 0 to 12, the beginning of environmental conditioning, absorbing before awareness. It's the stage that wrote your operating system. This is followed by 12 to 25, what I refer to as social shaping, forming your identity through belonging. It's the years where the question of who you are gets answered almost entirely by finding where you fit in. And then 25 to 40, performance consolidation, patterns hardening into personality. It's the years where the adaptations of adolescence stop feeling like choices and start feeling like simply you. Into 40 to 60, now pressure and amplification, unexamined patterns intensifying. It's where the pressure and the cost of accumulated living makes the patterns impossible to ignore. And lastly, 60 and beyond, where the fork in the road inevitably appears, conscious pattern awareness, and interruption or patterns that continue, and negative generational cycles that are repeated and passed on. The great news is that conscious interruption can happen earlier in this arc when you have the lens to see. That is the arc. 6 stages, 1 life. And here's what matters more than any single stage. The lens that formed early on shaped your perspective. Your perspective filtered your perception, and your perception has been holding your unrealized potential in place. My lifespan lens says something fundamentally different from anything you have been offered before. The self is a system. It was formed, it runs patterns, it can be understood, and once understood, it can be changed. This is developmental literacy, lived experience confirmed by science, not derived from it, making the complexity of your own formation readable, simply enough that you can find yourself in it. Now, let's dive deeper into the 0 to 12 stage, because this is where the operating system of the self was written. Harvard's Center on the Developing Child found that by age 5, 90% of the brain's neural architecture is already formed. The brain in your first 12 years is doing something it will never do again with the same completeness, building itself in direct response to the environment it is living inside. The most plastic, the most vulnerable it will ever be. What is absorbed here does not just influence who you become, it becomes the architecture, the lens through which everything that follows is filtered. The most important thing being absorbed, the single most formative question your nervous system was answering in those years was this: is it safe to be fully myself here? Dr. Gabor Mate, physician and author whose work has changed how we understand human development, spent decades asking a version of that same question. I love Gabor Mate, and what his synthesis of neuroscience, developmental psychology, and clinical practice revealed is something every human being deserves to know. When authenticity and attachment comes into conflict, when being fully yourself begins to feel like it might cost you the love, the safety, the belonging of the people you depend on, the child does not choose authenticity. The child chooses attachment every time because the child had to. Attachment was survival. The nervous system knew it, even when the conscious mind did not. So the self got quieter, gradually, not all at once. The needs that felt like too much became unspoken. The feelings that didn't fit became unexpressed. The questions that might have disrupted the peace became unasked. The template was set. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, whose decades of research gave us attachment theory, were documenting the same architecture from a different angle. The relational patterns formed in those first 12 years, whether love is reliable, whether safety can be counted on, whether belonging is a given or something that must be earned and managed, those patterns become the blueprint for every relationship that follows. Every room you walk into as an adult, you are walking into those rooms through the lens of what early attachment taught you about whether you are safe to be seen. Rest in that for a minute. The Y.E.S research, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Studies, added the layer that closes the picture. What matters most about what the research found is this: it was not only acute trauma that left a measurable mark. Chronic stress, emotional unavailability, conditional love, the absence of that simple, profound experience of being truly seen. These experiences accumulated over time shaped the nervous system, the stress response, and the relational patterns of the adults those children became. None of this is abstract. All of it is me and you. So, the child who learned that love arrived with performance became the adult who cannot rest until she's producing. The child who learned that needs were burdens became the adult who says, I'm fine, even when fine left the building long ago. The child who learned that silence kept the peace became the adult who swallows what needs to be said. The child who learned that belonging required shrinking became the adult who makes herself smaller in rooms where she was built to take up space. You are not broken. You are brilliant. You built a strategy that worked, that kept you safe, kept you loved, kept you belonging in the world you were born into. The question is not what's wrong with you. The question is, does the strategy still fit the life you want to live today? Now, one more thing before we move to the practice. Something I don't want you to miss. My lifespan lens helped me to see my story. It will help you to see your own story too. And it will help you to read the story of every person who shaped you. The parent who was critical, who had a parent before them who taught them that love looked like high standards. The partner who goes silent, who learned somewhere in those early years that silence was how you survived conflict. The colleague who cannot receive feedback, who absorbed early that imperfection had a cost. Everyone is looking through their own lens, and when you can see that, when you can understand that the behavior in front of you is a strategy built inside a story you didn't live, that is not permission to accept what shouldn't be accepted. That is the beginning of growing empathy, grounded and clear. And here's what the research now confirms unambiguously across career, relationships, and personal well-being. Empathy is not soft. It is the highest value leadership skill documented in research today. Forbes names it the single most important leadership competency. The numbers are specific. Employees are 107% more likely to trust a leader who leads with empathy, 127% more likely to feel genuinely connected to them. These are measurable outcomes. In relationships, neuroscience confirms that empathy creates stable social closeness. The social closeness is directly linked to happiness, well-being, and mental health, not as a side effect, as a mechanism. Empathy builds the conditions that makes a good life possible. And in your personal life, empathy that is grounded in self-awareness becomes one of the most protective tools you have. Because here's what the research also names. Empathy without awareness is a risk. When you cannot separate your story from someone else's, when you absorb their pain as yours before you have even seen the difference, empathy becomes depletion. It costs you instead of connecting you. This is the distinction my lifespan lens makes. You're not being taught to feel more. You're being taught to see more. To see that your own lens clearly enough that when you turn towards someone else's, you can be fully present for their story without depleting your energy by losing yourself inside it. This is not soft. That's one of the most powerful and rare leadership capacities a human being can develop, because everywhere you go, there you are, and everyone you meet, there they are too, looking out through their own lens. When your perspective shifts and your perception recalibrates, your unrealized potential is released and your empowered self is revealed. So here's your practice for this episode. I call it the lens pause, and I want to show you what it looks like, not in theory, in 3 moments you may know better than you'd like to admit, starting in the workplace. Someone in that meeting just said your idea, word for word, slightly repackaged, and the room responded to them the way you hoped they would respond to you, and you said nothing, smiled, moved on, and later driving home you asked yourself, why didn't I say something? Using the lens pause, notice something inside of you tightened in that room and you said nothing, a silence that was loud. Ask yourself, did I choose to stay silent, or did it just become part of me? And where in this arc did that silence form? Then return to what is actually true. Your idea had value. This room deserves your voice, not the performance of your silence. Now, with your child, they want to quit. The team, the instrument, the activity they'd worked hard at. And before they finish the sentence, something in you rises that has nothing to do with them. It has to do with what quitting meant in the household you grew up in. And you're about to parent from that place, from your lens, instead of theirs. The lens pause, notice. This reaction is older than this conversation. Ask, did I choose this reaction, or did it just become part of me? And where in this arc did it form? Return to your child, to this moment, to what they're actually asking you for. And lastly, with yourself. Someone who loves you asks what you want for dinner, for your birthday, for yourself. And you pause. Not because the question is hard, but because knowing what you want and saying out loud has never quite felt like something you were allowed to do freely. So you say whatever you want and mean it, and something in you goes just a little quieter. The lens pause, notice you just disappeared from your own life for a moment. Ask, did I choose to make myself smaller, or did it just become part of me? And where in this arc did that smallness begin? Return to what is actually true. What you want matters. It always did. Notice, ask, return. 3 moments, 1 practice. And each time you use it, you are doing something that little child never got to do. You're looking at the lens, not through it. That weight now has an origin. What was carried in the body before you arrived, what the nervous system absorbed in every year that followed, that is where it formed. That is what you have been carrying. And what has an origin is not your identity. It is where you started, not where you have to stay. Let's take a moment here before we move forward. You came into this episode with a lens. something you have not been aware you've been carrying your entire life, believing this was simply who you are. A drive that never rests, a silence that keeps the peace, needs that never quite got spoken, a belonging that always felt one condition away from solid. Today, you can look at that lens. And now, for the first time, you're not inside the lens looking out. You are looking at it from a vantage point you may never have had before. Zoomed out, the whole arc visible, your whole life, from before you arrived to exactly where you are standing or sitting right now. Doesn't matter whether you are 30 or 60, this view changes something. Because one of the things I hear most often from the people I walk alongside it is this: I wish I'd seen life through this lens earlier, not with regret, with recognition, the recognition that so much of what they spent decades managing, pushing through and building around had a beginning that held possibilities. And now they have the lens. That matters at any age, because what you can finally see, you can finally begin to choose differently. That's not a small thing. That's the beginning of everything. My lifespan lens, drawn not from a research institution or an academic framework, but from living, from my own story, from the stories of every person I sat across, from who was trying to understand why they kept arriving at the same place, no matter how much they achieved or how hard they worked. Science anchors it, but life wrote it first. And what makes it powerful is not that it describes human development in the abstract. It is that you see yourself in it, your story, your formation, your pattern. And here is where we are going next, because the lens didn't stop forming at 12. Between 12 and 25, something else was happening. The adaptations continued. The shaping continued. And by the time most of us arrived at adulthood, what had been absorbed became habit, and habit became personality, and personality, well, we stopped examining. This is just who I am became the mantra. And the answer to every question we stopped asking about ourselves, check out that introductory episode if you haven't seen it. Stay with me. That's where we're going. Chapter 3, Living My Story on Autopilot. Because if something shifted in you today, don't rush past it. That feeling is not discomfort. That is the beginning of the seeing. You now have the lens, the full one, end to end, and you know where it came from. Not from a textbook, not from someone else's research, but from lived experience, from yours and mine. This week, one practice, the lens pause. Notice, ask, using the lens, you know what to do. Then return. In the meeting where you held back something that deserved to be said. In the moment with your child where someone else's story started speaking louder than theirs. In the quiet of your own life where you're about to disappear again before anyone asked you to. Use it there, not to fix everything at once, to create one breath of distance between what was formed, what you are now seeing, and what you are choosing. Because that breath, that single moment of seeing, then choosing, is where your empowered self begins to live. Share this with someone who's been living inside a lens they've never had words to name, and subscribe, because the story doesn't stop here. Chapter 3 takes us somewhere every one of us has lived, and most of us have never fully understood. My name is Lolita Devi Singh. Leadership starts within. It starts with you, always. Until next time, say yes to leading better, living better, and yes, loving better.